The air hung thick with the iron scent as I stared at the wreckage of my life, the cruel laughter echoing in my ears like a death knell. He thought he had broken me, reduced me to nothing more than a shadow of my former self, a ghost haunting the halls of a life that was once vibrant and full of promise. They all did, really, basking in the perceived victory, blind to the storm brewing within me, a tempest of rage and a chillingly focused desire for retribution. My name is Heather, and this is the story of how I turned their victory into ashes. If you've ever felt betrayed by those closest to you, the ones you would do anything for, subscribe now to join our family and see how Heather turns the tables on them all. From the outside, my life with Mark appeared to be a fairy tale. A sprawling suburban home, complete with a manicured lawn and a two-car garage, two beautiful children, and a calendar filled with social engagements. Mark, the charming and successful entrepreneur, and me, the devoted wife and mother, managing the household with effortless grace. It was a carefully constructed facade, hiding the deep cracks that had begun to spiderweb beneath the surface. Mark had always been ambitious, driven by a relentless need for success, a trait that I initially admired. It was that ambition that had propelled him to build his tech company from the ground up, the very company that now afforded us this lavish lifestyle. However, somewhere along the way, that ambition had morphed into something darker, a cold and ruthless pursuit of power that consumed him entirely. He started working longer hours, his phone constantly buzzing with calls and messages, his attention drifting further and further away from me and the children. The warmth that had once characterized our relationship began to dissipate, replaced by a chilling indifference. I tried to talk to him to bridge the growing chasm between us, but my efforts were met with dismissals and empty promises of change. He accused me of being needy, of not understanding the pressures he was under, of being, in his words, utterly useless. The word stung, echoing in my mind long after he had uttered it, a constant reminder of my perceived worthlessness in his eyes. The injustice cut deep. I had sacrificed my own career aspirations to support Mark's dreams, putting my own ambitions on hold to raise our children and manage the household. I had believed in him, championed him, and stood by him through thick and thin, only to be repaid with contempt and belittlement. The useless remark became his go-to jab, a cruel barb he would throw my way whenever he felt I wasn't meeting his expectations, whenever he wanted to assert his dominance. He started subtly undermining my confidence, criticizing my appearance, my decisions, my very being. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, constantly striving to please him, terrified of triggering his wrath. The emotional abuse was insidious, chipping away at my self-esteem, leaving me feeling isolated and alone in my own home. I confided in my best friend, Sarah, seeking her advice and support. Sarah had always been my rock, a voice of reason and a source of unwavering encouragement. She urged me to stand up for myself, to refuse to tolerate Mark's behavior, but I was hesitant. I was afraid of what he might do, afraid of losing everything I had worked so hard to build. I was trapped in a cycle of fear and self-doubt, convinced that I was somehow responsible for Mark's actions. Then came the ultimate betrayal. The person I trusted most was one of them. My brother David had always been close to me. He knew how much I struggled with Mark's behavior. He was always on my side, or so I thought. I discovered a series of emails between Mark and David, their words like knives twisting in my gut. They were discussing ways to further diminish my role in the company, to cut me off financially, and to ultimately paint me as an unstable and unfit mother in the event of a divorce. David, my own flesh and crimson, was actively plotting against me, siding with Mark for personal gain. The revelation shattered the last vestiges of trust I had in my family, leaving me reeling in disbelief and a profound sense of betrayal. They thought I was weak, easily manipulated, a pawn in their twisted game. They were wrong. Terribly, fatally wrong. That was the moment Heather decided the game would change. The knowledge of their treachery became a constant companion, a dark cloud hanging over every aspect of my life. Sleepless nights were spent replaying conversations, dissecting every interaction, searching for clues I had missed, moments where their deception had been subtly revealed. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate me. I tried to confront Mark, armed with the printed emails, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. He initially denied everything, feigning outrage at the accusations, gaslighting me into questioning my own sanity. But when I presented the undeniable evidence, his facade crumbled, replaced by a cold and calculated indifference. He admitted to his actions, justifying them with a chilling lack of remorse. He claimed I was holding him back, that my incompetence was jeopardizing his success, that David was simply looking out for his best interests. He saw nothing wrong with what he had done, convinced that he was entitled to control my life, to dictate my worth. The conversation ended with him issuing an ultimatum. I could either accept his terms, relinquishing any claim to the company and submitting to his control, or I could leave and face the consequences. He made it clear that he would use his wealth and influence to ensure that I lost everything: my home, my children, my reputation. Desperate, I turned to a lawyer, hoping to find some legal recourse, some way to protect myself and my children. The lawyer, a seasoned professional with a weary demeanor, listened patiently to my story, his expression growing increasingly grim. He explained that due to the prenuptial agreement I had signed years ago, an agreement I had naively entered into without fully understanding its implications, my legal options were limited. Mark had cleverly structured his assets in a way that made it nearly impossible for me to claim a fair share of the company. And with David's fabricated character assassination ready to be unleashed, I would probably lose custody of my kids. The lawyer advised me to settle, to accept Mark's terms, to salvage what little I could before he completely destroyed me. His words were a crushing blow, confirming my worst fears. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, with no escape, no one to turn to. Mark's campaign to isolate me had been meticulously executed, leaving me vulnerable and alone. Even Sarah, bless her heart, couldn't offer much beyond emotional support. She was as shocked and appalled as I was, but she lacked the resources and the expertise to fight against Mark's vast network of lawyers and financial advisors. I was on my own. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and despair. I struggled to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the sake of my children, plastering on a fake smile and pretending that everything was fine. But inside, I was crumbling. The constant stress and fear took a toll on my health. I lost weight, suffered from insomnia, and became increasingly withdrawn. I started having panic attacks, triggered by the slightest thing: a phone call, a sudden noise, a fleeting glimpse of Mark's face. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a gilded cage with a monster. Mark, sensing my desperation, tightened his grip, increasing the pressure, relishing in his control. He flaunted his power, reminding me at every opportunity of my helplessness, of my dependence on him. He would bring other women to the house when he knew I would be home, making no attempt to hide his infidelity. He'd leave their jewelry and expensive perfume in plain sight. It was a calculated attempt to break my spirit, to force me into submission. He wanted me to be completely broken, utterly defeated, a living testament to his dominance. Their biggest weakness: they underestimated me. They believed that because I had always been compliant, always willing to compromise, I would simply roll over and accept my fate. They failed to see the fire that still burned within me, the unwavering determination to protect myself and my children. They mistook my silence for weakness, my fear for submission. I knew that I couldn't fight them head-on, not with their resources and their connections. But I also knew that I couldn't surrender. I had to find a way to fight back, to expose their lies and to reclaim my life. The injustice of it all fueled my resolve. The countless nights I spent crying myself to sleep, the constant humiliation, the fear for my children's future, it all coalesced into a burning desire for retribution. I would not let them win. I would not let them destroy me. I would make them pay. The plan had begun. The walls of my once beloved home seemed to close in, the opulent furnishings mocking my despair. I was a prisoner in paradise, surrounded by the trappings of wealth, yet utterly bankrupt in spirit. Sleep offered no escape, only a relentless replay of Mark's cruel words and David's treacherous betrayal. Every shadow seemed to whisper accusations, every reflection revealed a stranger, a hollow-eyed, defeated woman I barely recognized. My appetite vanished, replaced by a constant nausea that churned in my stomach. I existed in a perpetual state of anxiety, my nerves frayed, my body trembling. One evening, after Mark had paraded yet another woman through the house, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and mocking glances in her wake, I retreated to the bathroom, the only sanctuary left in my increasingly hostile environment. I stared at my reflection, the image staring back gaunt and haunted. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I stumbled to the sink, my hands gripping the cold porcelain. As I retched, a wave of dizziness overcame me, and I collapsed onto the cold tile floor, the world spinning around me. I lay there for what seemed like an eternity, the cold seeping into my bones, the taste of bile burning in my throat. It was in that moment, sprawled on the cold bathroom floor, that something shifted within me. A flicker of defiance ignited in the darkness, a spark of resolve that had been dormant for far too long. I realized that I had allowed myself to become a victim, that I had passively accepted Mark's abuse and David's treachery. I had allowed their actions to define me, to strip me of my self-worth, but no more. As I slowly pushed myself up, my body aching, my spirit renewed, I made a silent vow. I would not let them break me. I would not let them steal my life. I would fight back, not with anger or desperation, but with cold, calculated precision. The tears that streamed down my face were not tears of sorrow, but tears of determination. I rose from the bathroom floor a changed woman. The fear hadn't vanished, but it was now accompanied by a chilling resolve. I would use their arrogance against them, their belief in their own invincibility as their ultimate downfall. The first step was to appear compliant, to lull them into a false sense of security. I started agreeing with Mark's demands, nodding along to his pronouncements, offering no resistance to his increasingly outrageous behavior. I even apologized for my shortcomings, reinforcing his belief that he had broken me. I became a master of deception, masking my true feelings with a carefully crafted facade of submission. I knew that I had to gather information, to understand their plans, to identify their weaknesses. I started paying closer attention to Mark's conversations, eavesdropping on his phone calls, subtly probing for details about his business dealings. I even managed to gain access to his computer, copying crucial documents and emails onto a secure external drive. It was a risky game, but I was determined to play it to the end. I also began to secretly document Mark's behavior, recording his verbal abuse and his infidelity, gathering evidence that would later prove invaluable. I knew that I had to be patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless. There was no room for error. Every move had to be carefully calculated, every step meticulously planned. The abused wife was gone. In her place was a strategist. I started feigning interest in the company, asking Mark questions about his work, pretending to want to be more involved. He initially scoffed at my efforts, dismissing me as intellectually incapable of understanding his complex business dealings. But I persisted, gradually wearing him down, until he started to confide in me, sharing details about his latest projects, his financial strategies, and his ongoing disputes with his competitors. He saw my newfound interest as a sign of my renewed devotion, completely oblivious to the fact that I was gathering ammunition to use against him. David, too, became a target of my deception. I rekindled our relationship, showering him with affection and attention, pretending to forgive his betrayal. I learned about his financial troubles, his gambling debts, and his desperate need for Mark's continued support. I discovered that he was deeply in debt and utterly reliant on Mark's generosity, a vulnerability that I knew I could exploit. They saw me smiling. They thought they'd won. They were dead wrong. I smiled. I played their game, but I was recording everything. Their words, their lies, their arrogance, every single syllable was meticulously captured, a digital time bomb waiting to detonate. I invested in a high-quality audio recorder, concealing it in plain sight, disguised as an everyday object. I made sure it was always within earshot, silently documenting their every conversation, every plot, every scheme. It became my constant companion, a silent witness to their treachery. I also installed hidden cameras throughout the house, disguised as smoke detectors and air fresheners, capturing their actions on video. I knew that visual evidence would be crucial in discrediting their claims and exposing their lies. I studied forensics, learning how to authenticate recordings, how to detect tampering, how to ensure that my evidence would be admissible in court. I consulted with a private investigator, a discreet and resourceful individual who specialized in uncovering hidden truths. He helped me gather additional evidence, tracking Mark's movements, documenting his infidelity, and uncovering his hidden assets. He also provided me with legal advice, guiding me through the complex legal landscape and helping me understand my rights. He warned me about the potential risks involved in my plan, reminding me that Mark and David were powerful and ruthless men who would stop at nothing to protect themselves. One evening, while Mark was away on one of his business trips, I decided to confront David. I invited him over for dinner, cooking his favorite meal, pretending that everything was normal. As we sat at the table, I casually steered the conversation towards his financial troubles, expressing my concern for his well-being. He initially brushed off my concerns, but I persisted, subtly probing for details about his debts and his reliance on Mark's support. He eventually broke down, confessing the full extent of his financial woes, his voice laced with desperation and shame. I seized the opportunity, offering him a way out, a chance to redeem himself. I told him that I knew about his betrayal, about his involvement in Mark's scheme to destroy me. I showed him the emails, the evidence of his treachery, my voice trembling with controlled rage. He initially denied everything, but when I presented the undeniable proof, his facade crumbled. He pleaded for forgiveness, claiming that he had been coerced by Mark, that he had acted out of desperation, that he regretted his actions. I offered him a deal. He could either continue to side with Mark and face the consequences of his actions, or he could help me expose Mark's lies and reclaim my life. I told him that if he chose to help me, I would ensure that he was protected, that he would not face any legal repercussions for his involvement in the scheme. I knew that he was motivated by self-preservation, that he would do anything to protect himself. I was betting that his fear of Mark was greater than his loyalty, a gamble that would either make or break my plan. He looked at me, his eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" The following weeks were a whirlwind of covert meetings, hushed phone calls, and carefully orchestrated maneuvers. David became my inside man, feeding me information about Mark's plans, providing me with access to crucial documents, and sabotaging his efforts from within. He was a reluctant ally, driven by fear and self-interest, but he was nonetheless an invaluable asset. Together, we meticulously documented Mark's illegal activities, his fraudulent business dealings, his tax evasions, and his corrupt relationships with government officials. We gathered evidence of his infidelity, compiling a detailed record of his affairs with other women, including photographs, emails, and hotel receipts. We uncovered his hidden assets, tracing his money through a network of offshore accounts and shell corporations. Every piece of information, every document, every recording was carefully cataloged and stored in a secure location, ready to be unleashed at the opportune moment. The anticipation was almost unbearable, the desire for retribution burning within me like a raging fire. I knew that I had to be patient, that I had to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I couldn't afford to make any mistakes, to reveal my hand prematurely. Everything had to be perfect, precise, and utterly devastating. The day they tried to end me was the day they lost everything. The culmination of my secret efforts arrived unexpectedly, disguised as a carelessly discarded USB drive. Mark, in his arrogance, had left it lying on his desk, assuming I wouldn't dare touch his precious work. But curiosity, fueled by months of suppressed rage, propelled me forward. The moment I plugged it into my computer, I knew I'd struck gold. It contained everything: detailed financial records, offshore account information, incriminating emails, and even video files documenting his corrupt dealings. But the most explosive discovery was a folder labeled Project Nightingale. Inside were documents outlining Mark's plan to bankrupt his biggest competitor, a man named Robert Thompson, using illegal tactics and fabricated evidence. He was going to completely ruin Robert. Mark was not just an adulterer and a liar, he was a criminal. And now I had the proof. Their biggest weakness: they thought they were untouchable. I copied everything onto my secure drive, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was it. This was the weapon I needed to dismantle their empire. The trap was set. Now it was time to lure them in. I arranged a peace summit with Mark, suggesting we meet at our favorite restaurant, the place where we had celebrated our anniversaries, our birthdays, all our milestones. I wanted him to feel safe, comfortable, in control. I wore the dress he loved, the one he had bought me on our honeymoon. I even dabbed on the perfume he always complimented. When he arrived, he looked surprised, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. But I greeted him with a warm smile, a genuine-seeming hug. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mark," I said, my voice soft and contrite. "I realize I've been difficult, unreasonable. I want us to fix this for the kids." He visibly relaxed, the suspicion fading. He took my hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. "I'm glad to hear you say that," he said, his voice sincere. "I want that too." Little did he know, the restaurant was bugged, every word, every gesture being recorded. David was seated at a nearby table, pretending to be engrossed in a book, but his eyes were constantly darting towards us, his face pale with anxiety. He knew what was coming. Throughout the dinner, I played the part of the repentant wife, showering Mark with compliments, agreeing with his opinions, and subtly steering the conversation towards his business dealings. I asked him about Project Nightingale, feigning ignorance about its true nature. He, of course, couldn't resist the opportunity to boast, detailing his plan to destroy Robert Thompson with chilling precision. He reveled in his power, his arrogance blinding him to the danger he was in. With each passing minute, the tension in the room grew thicker, the air crackling with unspoken words. I could feel David's eyes on me, his silent plea for me to end it, to unleash the storm. But I held my nerve, patiently waiting for the perfect moment. As we finished our meal, I excused myself to go to the ladies' room. I didn't need to go to the bathroom. I had a call to make. I dialed Robert Thompson's number, the number I had gotten from the private investigator. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "My name is Protagonist Name, and I have information that could save your company and destroy Mark." I hung up, my hands slick with sweat. The plan was in motion. Walking back to the table, I saw Mark beaming, utterly convinced he'd won. I sat down, took a sip of my wine, and gave him a serene smile. A few minutes later, Robert Thompson walked into the restaurant, his face grim, his eyes blazing with fury. He strode directly to our table, ignoring the startled looks of the other diners. "Mark," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We need to talk." Mark's smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He tried to bluster to deny, but Robert cut him off, slamming a thick stack of documents onto the table. "Don't bother lying," Robert said. "I know everything, your entire scheme, Project Nightingale, every single detail." Mark's face crumbled. He looked at me, his eyes filled with betrayal and dawning horror. What is this?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I simply smiled, a cold, detached smile that mirrored the emptiness I had felt for so long. "Consider it karma, Mark," I said softly. "Payback for all the pain you've caused." The next few hours were a blur of chaos and recrimination. Robert Thompson called the authorities, presenting them with the evidence I had provided. Mark was taken into custody, his empire collapsing around him. David, seeing the writing on the wall, tried to flee, but he was apprehended as well, his dreams of wealth and power dissolving into dust. The news spread like wildfire, engulfing Mark's company, his reputation, his entire life in a blaze of scandal. His business partners abandoned him, his friends disowned him, and his assets were seized. He lost everything. The company he had built from the ground up was now in ruins. His reputation was in tatters. His freedom was gone. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a sense of cold satisfaction washing over me. It was over. It was finally over. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The fallout was immense. Mark faced multiple charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion. David, having turned state's evidence, received a lighter sentence, but his reputation was forever tarnished. He became a pariah, shunned by his former friends and associates. As for me, I was free. Free from Mark's abuse, free from David's treachery, free to rebuild my life on my own terms. I sold my story to the media, exposing Mark's crimes and my own role in bringing him down. I became a symbol of resilience, an inspiration to other women who had suffered in silence. I used my newfound platform to advocate for victims of domestic abuse, to raise awareness about the insidious nature of financial control, and to empower others to break free from their own cycles of abuse. They lost everything. I just smiled. In the end, revenge wasn't the cathartic release I had imagined. It didn't magically erase the pain or undo the damage, but it was necessary. It was a means of reclaiming my power, of asserting my agency, of proving to myself that I was not a victim but a survivor. It was about drawing a line in the sand and saying, enough. It was about refusing to be silenced, about refusing to be broken. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.